live on YouTube. So as usual, we're live on my Twitter and LinkedIn. That's at Will Critchlow in both places. And on the SearchPilot YouTube channel. We're live streamed to all of those places. My name is Will Critchlow. I'm founder and CEO at SearchPilot. And I do these weekly and roughly this time, normally. Generally on a Tuesday afternoon, my time. I'm in the UK, so about 4:15 in the afternoon, which is 11:15 a.m. East Coast time in the US, 8:15 a.m. on the West Coast. And I've got various things to talk about this week. For reasons that escape me, the UK puts almost all of its public holidays in April and May. So it's been a super long weekend here. We had both Friday and Monday off. And I guess as a result, I've got a bit less in the way of work-related things to talk about that I've been reading and watching and listening to this week. But as usual, a few things. So a couple of things that I've been paying or enjoyed recently that I thought it might be nice to just talk about briefly. First is, I'm just going to share my screen. First is this podcast episode that I enjoyed. So this is the Practical Founders podcast, and it was an episode with Chris Savage, one of the founders of Wistia. I've been a fan of Wistia since their earliest days. I've got fond memories of visiting some of their earliest offices back in the Such Love Boston days. And I really enjoyed this episode of Chris talking on the Practical Founders podcast. He was talking about some things that I care about very deeply, actually, particularly building sustainable businesses and enjoying the journey. Enjoying the journey is actually one of our core values at SearchPilot, based on experiences from running Distilled and now into the SearchPilot years. And I've been doing this, counting Distilled and SearchPilot, for 19 years this month, which is pretty wild for me to think about. And so I spend quite a lot of time thinking about how to work hard but sustainably. It really is a marathon, not a sprint. You know, if you think about these things are never overnight successes, everything takes longer than you think. And Chris mentioned this as well, that it can feel at times in the early days like, you know, an endless slog. And I really do buy into the idea that a lot of successful businesses are built from folks who just keep going. And obviously there is a survivorship bias in there, that you can only keep going if you survive. But it's something that I've thought about a lot, because there are actually a surprising number of folks that I got to know back in those early days. I think Wistia got founded around the same time we did, 05, 06. And similarly with talking to Rand at Moz and various other places, that it does take a surprisingly long time. And when you think about the fact that you're building a business that you have to be able to operate for a decade plus, multiple decades potentially, it's fascinating to me to think about how you do that sustainably. And so that's obviously on the, I guess, personal side, the psychology, the mindset. You've got to keep enjoying it, which I definitely am here. And obviously the business also needs to be set up to be sustainable in itself. SearchPilot is, we're default alive, as they say in Silicon Valley occasionally, when you come across a Silicon Valley company that actually is default alive. We're bootstrapped and funded from our own cash flow. So our customers are the ones who have to believe in us most, which I think is a very powerful place to be. And this is one of the things Chris was getting at, is when you have to listen to your customers, then you can build something really cool. And since we're now fully separated from Brain Labs, we're quote unquote back to bootstrapped, as we've bought out SearchPilot and fully independent now. So we're fully independent. We're free to chase our vision. And so anyway, I'd recommend having listened to this episode with Chris and the Practical Founders podcast. And it's probably one of the best things I've listened to this week. I started reading a new book, which is a book called The Motive by Patrick Lencioni. And I'll talk in a minute about why I picked this book, but I'm most of the way through. It's only a short book, and I am not yet quite clicking with it. I think maybe this particular anecdote, this particular parable isn't resonating with me particularly. Maybe it's not one of the particular kinds of ways that I tend to screw up. I found that with another of his books, actually, that called The Temptations of a CEO, really only one of the temptations truly spoke to me in a visceral way. Even so, I still find myself referring back to that, and I've used things from many of his books. Similarly with this one called Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive, and the one that springs to mind all the time is the obsession with embedding the company values and the values that you want to create into everything, into processes, into operations, into documentation, into all of your decisions, referring back to them in your decisions. That's something I use a lot. So it's a shame that this one hasn't quite resonated with me just yet, and hopefully I can get I'll get something from it, and I'll report back to you on that. The reason I picked it, though, is because this other book by Lencioni, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, is probably, well, it's definitely an all-time great. It may even be my favorite book in terms of developing my business skills. It's the single book I wish I'd read earlier in my career, actually, and it has this this model of the 5 dysfunctions of a dysfunctional team, and obviously you build a functional team then by avoiding the dysfunctions. And we talk about a lot about this with the senior team at SearchPilot, and have baked it into our values as well. Fundamentally, it's about the idea that if you want to achieve the results and you're holding yourself as a team accountable to those things, you have to build on a foundation of trust. And particularly the most kind of practical day-to-day element of it is this idea of conflict and commit, which comes up in various places. I've heard it called commit. I think that's what they call it in the Amazon core values. And the idea of these is that it's quite a shared concept, a shared mindset, that we know that not every decision is going to go our way. We're grown-ups in the workplace, and we accept that we can't have everything our way, even if you're the founder, even if you're the CEO. And the idea of this is that we all agree that we will speak up with any conflict that we have with a potential decision when it's early enough that that decision could still be changed, or when it's still being made. And that in exchange for seeking out that conflict, the decision maker agrees to explain their decision versus the conflict. And crucially, all of us then say that we will commit to that decision and we'll get behind it, and there'll be no fingers and saying, I told you so, if it doesn't work out the way that we all hoped, because we had that chance to be heard. We had our conflict heard during the decision-making process, and someone has to make that decision. And as I say, not every decision is going to go everybody's way. There's basically a kind of logical impossibility. And there's something powerful about then agreeing and deciding to all get behind the decision, even if it isn't the one that we personally would have made in that situation. And it ties into another very powerful quote that I've talked about before. I mentioned my decision log, I think, in a recent episode. So one of the challenges I struggle with, in fact, I think it's in that Temptations of a CEO book from Lencioni as well, is the temptation to always want to be right. And those who know me will be unsurprised by this, but one of the ways it manifests, or it can manifest, is in indecisiveness, because those of us who want to be right and want to be right all the time are tempted to postpone decisions until we can be more certain. And the danger of that is that generally decisions are better taken, and it's better to take the decision, move fast, change our mind if we need to, especially in those, again, back to the Amazon thing, the two-way door decisions where we can walk back through the door if we need to. They're not irreversible. And to help me with that, a couple of techniques is, one is I've started keeping a decision log. So it's not completely scientific. It's basically the decisions that I remember struggling with since I last updated my decision log, and figure if I can't remember them, they weren't that significant after all. Often they're not particularly significant. They're just the things that took my headspace, that took my mental energy during that time. And by documenting them, and then when I come back to it, giving myself basically good enough, unknown, or I wish I'd done this differently. Actually, what I've trained, or I'm beginning to train myself, is the vast majority of the time, you're better off making that decision. And you come back to it, you're like, yes, I'm glad that we decided that. I'm glad we decided then, and I'm glad we pushed forward, because the speed was better than perfection on the decision making. I think there's only 1 or 2 in my log that I've scored as. I really wish I'd done this differently. And yeah, that's pretty good hit rate. And so tying it all back to this, to the conflict and commit and everything else, there's a quote from, I think it's Scott McNeely, who's the founder, Sun Microsystems, who said that rather than putting all your energy into, paraphrasing, rather than putting all your energy into making the right decision, put that same energy into making whatever decision you make the right one. And this is basically the team version of that, where we all, once we've made that, put all of our energy, instead of arguing and discussing and endlessly going around the loop, we put our energy into making it work. Okay, so I'm building up to the point of today's discussion, but one more thing that I've read while we're just talking about that, I'll just mention this Wired article, which I found absolutely fascinating and highly recommend read. It's not very tactical or actionable. I don't think there's anything that you'll find in here that will necessarily make you a better marketer, or a better SEO, or a better even business person, but it's just an incredible story about this team that came together to write the original Transformers paper, Transformers being the technology that underpins both Gemini, but crucially, because they beat them to the punch, was OpenAI's ChatGPT technology was based on this breakthrough academic paper that came from Google. And the history is not yet written, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the longer run, and the value of the basic research that was done at Google compared to the productization that's been done at various places, including Google. But actually, this article had me thinking more about immigration policy than about large language models. It's amazing to look at the incredible range of folks from around the world who came together to make this breakthrough. Tons of different backgrounds and origin stories and everything else. And anyway, so it had me thinking more about immigration policy, but we'll save that for another day. Anyway, back to the topic for today. So I'm going to start with goal setting, because what I actually want to talk about is a couple of things that we've learned from integrating Googlebot data and Search Console data into our test analysis suite. And one of the big things is it's really made a difference, particularly the Googlebot data. It's really made a difference to the tie-in to goal setting. So I'll explain what I'm talking about. Firstly, a little bit about goal setting. So this is a slide from some internal training that we run. This is the 4 disciplines of execution, which yet another book, they call it the 4DX model. And it's something that I've really kind of bought into. I think it plays particularly to my strengths, weaknesses, temptations, particularly the first point being focus. I'm not always super good at focusing, and I try very hard to kind of counter that as a result. But I'm just going to talk about the first 2 of these disciplines today. This is not a seminar on the 4 disciplines of execution, but this all ties into the Googlebot data, first of all. So the problem with a lot of goals is that the thing you really want, the fundamental thing that you're shooting towards, what 4DX calls the wildly important element, is often what's called a lag measure. So it's only at the very end of the process that you can tell how you did, and you can find out if you've achieved it. So think year-over-year growth of organic search by the end of the year is the kind of thing that you might be striving towards, or obviously revenue attributable to that, something like that. And if we just try to hold ourselves accountable to our goal along the way, we can't really tell how we're doing. There's many ways that it can fluctuate. There's many ways it can be backloaded. There's many ways that we can be off track and not know it, or on track and unable to prove it. And tons of important metrics are like this. I might even go as far to say almost all important metrics are like this. And the solution in this model is what 4DX calls lead. And so a lead metric is something like a bet, essentially. And it's saying, I bet that if we can run at least 20 SEO tests per quarter, we'll hit our growth goals. It's not guaranteed, you'll notice, because firstly, who knows if 20 is the right number? Secondly, there's no guarantee that tests are going to be winning tests. Thirdly, it says nothing about the magnitude of those wins, and it says nothing about how they compound and join together to hit that goal, or what else could be going on in the background, right? As we've talked about many times, it's possible to run winning tests and be better than the counterfactual. In other words, be doing better than you would have done otherwise, but still be overtaken by someone else. And so it's possible for year-over-year traffic to go down even in the face of winning tests. But the point is, it's a bet, and we've got to take some bets. We've got to make some decisions in the face of uncertainty and a lack of complete knowledge. For instance, that I picked test cadence as the bet there. In other words, how many tests can we run per quarter? Because this is a common feature of many advanced experimentation programs. When I talk to smart teams at big companies in particular who have got very experienced experimentation programs and they want to add SEO testing into their experimentation program, they're often, one of the key questions they ask is, how many tests can we run? How quickly can we run tests? Because online, it turns out that's a really good lead metric for a testing program, and particularly for online testing, website testing, because that kind of testing tends to uncover relatively few but relatively large wins. And so what that means is that sampling far and wide, running as many tests as you can with a high test cadence, is the path that many folks pick to get to success. Which finally brings us to some of the benefits that we've found from one of our new features. I'm going to show you a demo account. So this is me logged into my demo account at SearchPilot. And I should note, this is a demo account. It says eBay. eBay is not a customer. This is simply mocked up data just to show off the platform and the interface. And so what I'm going to show, so this is a dashboard showing completed experiments. And we can see that we've got a number of different kinds of results here. So we're going to go and look at a positive one. And we've for a long time had this kind of interface where we can see the test result data. We can see the divergence of what has actually happened compared to the forecast. We can see the estimated additional sessions that we're getting as a result and the confidence interval on all of that. But the new features, firstly, include this Googlebot crawl insights data. And we can see that we've got a few different metrics here. So the simplest one to understand is the percentage of pages crawled. It's second because it's not actually the most helpful metric, but it is easy to understand. So I'll start here. And this is simply from the start date of the day the test was launched, which is this date up here. So from that date onwards, what percentage, by the end of the day, what percentage of pages that we know exist in that site section, in this case, in the variant group, but we could look at the control group instead if we wanted. So in the control or in the variant group, what percentage of the pages have been crawled by a particular user agent day by day over time? And we can see that even on the first day in this particular case, 86% of pages got recrawled. Obviously, this is modeling a very large website, be crawled very quickly and very deeply. We get to over 95% by this, and so on. And this is a very quick crawling curve, but nonetheless, it's powerful and useful to see. On some smaller websites, what we often find is that some of those very low traffic pages, particularly the long tail of low traffic pages, can be crawled less frequently. And so sometimes it's useful to look at another metric, which is the percentage of sessions crawled. So this is the same thing that we were just looking at, but weighted by the amount of organic traffic that each of those pages get. So if you imagine a really simple example with just 2 pages in the site section, but where one of those pages got 3/4 of the traffic, the percentage of pages crawled when that first page has been crawled on its own would be 50%, but the percentage of sessions would be 75%, because that single page is accounting for 3/4 of the organic search traffic to that site section. And so what we can see here, this number is typically higher, right? Because the most trafficked pages tend to be the most frequently crawled pages. And so what we're seeing here is that even on the first day, almost 92% of sessions have been crawled. In other words, pages that account for almost 92% of the sessions have been recrawled since the test start date, rising to over 98% and onwards. And again, we can filter by these different things. I'm not going to run through all of the features, but we can also go and see more about the details of those pages crawled and not crawled at any moment. So back to the insights. We rolled this out because we expected to get some benefits from this that included the ability to end tests quicker, particularly inconclusive tests that it turned out had in fact been recrawled fully or fully enough since the test was launched. And we have seen that benefit, and that's useful. And it that test cadence thing, because the quicker you can end an inconclusive test, the faster you can get on to running the next test that hopefully will turn out to be a conclusive one. But we did get an additional surprising benefit. And we found that we've also got the ability to shorten the time between tests. And I don't know that we've talked a lot in public before about what we call cooldown periods. We talk about it a fair deal with our customers internally. So cooldown is essentially the length of time it takes after ending a test. So you run the test, then you end the test. And how long does it take for Googlebot to recrawl enough of that site section that you can kick off the next test? Because typically you're either rolling the test back or rolling it out. So during the test, it's on, say, 50% of pages. And then if it's a winning test, you're going to roll it out to 100%. If it's a losing test, you're going to roll it back to 0% of pages. Either way, the site section is changing and there's fluctuation in there. And if you're going to want to run the next test, you ideally want that stabilize and what we call cool down before you run the next one. And we've previously recommended a 7-day cooldown period. But we're now seeing site sections getting recrawled much quicker than that. I mean, you can see here in this demo data, which is representative of what we see on a number of large sites, is that especially when you look at the sessions, even by day 2, 98% of those of organic sessions are landing on pages that have been recrawled already. And so having this data is enabling us to shorten that cooldown window, especially for some of these really large sites. And what that means is that we can fit more tests into a given time period on a specific site section. And so back to our goal setting, if our lead measure is test cadence and how many tests we can run in a quarter, say, the time taken before we declare a test inconclusive and shortening the time in between tests that prevents us running the next test after finishing a previous test. Both of these things improve our cadence and help us shoot towards those goals and those lag metrics. And so I thought it might be worth just talking through some of the things that we've seen. So Googlebot is pretty voracious. And as I said, most of our customers are crawled much faster than our 7-day cooldown period. And what we're kind of typically seeing is 70 to 90% crawled gets happens like very quickly. And 90% plus is when we have a kind of bench, believing that Google's seen the change broadly enough to be able to understand that change and for it to be incorporated as we go along. And so, yeah, that typically happens quite quickly. The other new feature that I think I've mentioned recently is that we have this, it's currently in beta, Search Console Insights. So when we have a test that's been declared a winner, so this test is a winning test because even the bottom end of its confidence interval is above 0. So we're, in this case, 95% sure that this is a winning test. What we can now do is we can also look to explain this data with Search Console information. And we have these two key metrics here, relative rank change and relative click-through rate change. It's worth noting that rank changes, negative rank changes are a good thing, remembering that position 1 is better than position 2. So decreasing your relative rank is a good thing. Relative rank is the difference in change in the, it's easiest to look at it visually. So before the intervention, we have the control at an average rank of 8.03, rising to 8.14 during the test, whereas the variant dropped from 8.62 to 7.15. And so that's the average rank. The relative rank change is the difference between those two numbers. So variant improved more than control did. And so we can kind of say, well, this test at least included an improvement in rankings. Click-through rate is more traditional. Up is good. And in this case, again, we can flip to see click-through rate, and control click-through rate barely changes, but rate improves during the period of the test. And if we want to dive into this a bit more, we can flick to a table view as well. So in this case, we've got a positive test, and both of the Search Console metrics are positive as well. What we found is that this is most useful for explaining positive or negative tests. it's much more useful than for that than it is for declaring whether a particular test is a winner or a loser. And the reason for that is manyfold, but at least part of it is down to the danger of sampling data from Search Console. So similarly to the Googlebot data, we have this kind of data capture summary, which is a very similar metric. So path capture rate is similar to the percentage of paths that are being recrawled. This is of all of the pages that we know about in the variant, how many of them show up in the data, and similarly for the control. So in this particular case, we're seeing about 3/4 of the pages that we know exist and get organic traffic showing up in the Search Console data at all. But in this case, a pretty good session capture rate. So although it's only 3/4 of pages, it's 95% or 95% or so of all of the organic sessions go to pages that do show up in Search Console data. So this is pretty good. Actually, we see quite a wide range. So we often see below 70%, which we think is pretty sparse. And we actually have one large website customer whose PDPs, product description pages, product pages, well below 50%, quite commonly. And so at that level, really, you can't say a great deal about what's going on from the Search Console data when it's so sampled and so sparse. But nonetheless, for some tests like this one where you're getting 95% session capture rate, we can believe that this is probably the explanation for what's going on here. And of course, these metrics are also dependent on one another. So my suspicion is this particular test would be a rank improvement that caused a click-through rate improvement is probably what's most likely here, because remember that ranking better tends to result in better click-through rates. But it's possible to see no movement in the rank or insignificant movement in the rank and still see a click-through rate improvement, which is what happens when the search snippet is improved, for example. But alongside all of this, there are other reasons why. So it's not just the sampling that causes difficulties with using Search Console data to analyze tests, and at least at present we're sticking to analyzing tests based off traffic and if it's a full funnel test, conversions. And some of that is that we've seen all kinds of weird things in these metrics. By their necessity, they're averages, but because they're either averages of, in the case of rankings, a number that is more ordinal and not really that averageable, or in the case of a click-through rate, it's an average of an average because it's, click-through rate is an average metric all of its own. Either of them can move in the wrong direction. So you can imagine that, for example, if you gain a highly competitive, high traffic ranking, so you start ranking for something that you didn't before that could drive a lot of traffic. If it is a low click-through rate, traffic, then your average click-through rate could go down, even as your average traffic went up. So the click-through rate is moving against the kind of business metrics. And there's all kinds of challenges with other such features on the page. So one of the problems with tracking rankings is you've no idea what's going on with ads or rich results on the page. And even at the theoretical level, if you imagine how do you capture something starting or stopping ranking? So if you have something that on average you rank at position 9, say, and then you have a number of rankings that were in the 20s, and then they just go away, then your average rank might actually improve, even though what you've actually done is lost rankings entirely. So there's some challenges with all of this stuff. There are some for those things, but essentially they end up correcting all the way back to clicks, really. And so we start converging back on essentially analytics data and visits from organic search. We're getting deep down into the weeds here, but it is interesting to me that these are useful for explanatory purposes, and that is that's the main thing that we've released this feature for. Is once we've got this test, we've got this result, we're statistically significantly seeing an increase in traffic. We know that Googlebot's seen enough data to be fairly confident of it. And the next question that always gets asked is, well, why? is this as a result of rankings or click-through rate changes? And now we can explore that data and see how that has all moved over time. We're going to do some more R&D around this. I always like to give away little snippets of things that we're thinking about in this model. So we're experimenting with all kinds of different ways of extracting the Search Console data. We are experimenting with new ways of aggregating that data and if we can make it more explanatory. And we're also doing some R&D around the click data that's available. So this is at the moment only exposing click-through rate and as well as rankings. But of course, there is impressions and click data as well. And click data in particular could be a particularly interesting analytics agnostic way of tracking a secondary metric that is kind of a similar thing, but potentially less susceptible to things like skew from cookie acceptance banners, which can massively distort your GA4 data in particular. And I think probably other analytics tools. So yeah, lots to think about there. I think probably the key single main insight that I was talking about was this idea of, as we set goals, there's the thing we really want, but we have to act on things that we can measure along the way. One particularly useful lead measure that we can act on along the way when it comes to an experimentation program is about how many tests we can run per quarter, per month, whatever it might be. And our Googlebot data has turned out to be a breakthrough for this in two ways. The way we expected, which is the ability to end inconclusive tests sooner when we become confident that they've been sufficiently recrawled, and a way that we didn't quite expect, which is that we're able to compress the time in between tests, our recommended cooldown period, as we call it, where we previously were recommending 7 days cooldown, and now we're able to do that quicker on many websites where we're seeing they are consistently getting those site sections recrawled sufficiently within, even just a couple of days after the end of a test, and that it's then ready for rerunning. That's been useful to you, and as I say, slightly funny week as I had the long weekend here in the UK, so maybe a little bit less business reading and so forth. I will, as usual, tweet out and add to the LinkedIn comment section links to all the things that I talked about today. And if you're interested in more, you can head to searchpilot.com/live, where there's various resources, including some of our customer stories, kind of the successes that some folks have had with our SEO testing programs. Some resources on how SEO testing works, so you can dive a little bit more into that detail, share with your colleagues if you need to, as well as test results. So you can just read some of our test results, individual SEO case studies, and sign up for our SEO case study newsletter, which puts a new SEO test result in your inbox every 2 weeks. And finally, if you want to see the SearchPilot platform in action, at searchpilot.com/live, there's also a form where you can submit your details, and one of the team will get in touch to walk you through the program and show you the platform in action. So my name is Will Critchlow. If you want to join me for these calls every week, the best bet is to follow me and SearchPilot wherever you prefer on social media. We live stream these to my Twitter @Will Critchlow, my LinkedIn @Will Critchlow, and the SearchPilot YouTube channel, which you can find quite easily on YouTube by searching for SearchPilot as well. It's been a blast. Head to searchpilot.com/live for more information. Until next week, take care.